Hello, everyone, and welcome. Today we're going to be focusing on Chapter 8, Alcohol and Other Drugs. Here's an overview of our chapter. Drugs are used either for therapeutic or recreational purposes and may be legal, illegal, or undesignated. Drug addiction has two essential characteristics, which are increased tolerance and withdrawal. In the United States, use of alcoholic beverages is considered an accepted part of the dominant culture. Abuse of alcohol may cause health problems, accidents, and family problems. Many Americans smoke, and people who do not smoke may be harmed by environmental tobacco smoke. Prescription drugs benefit millions of people, but some can become dependent. Over-the-counter drugs are subject to abuse and can be dangerous if not taken as directed. Many also use illegal drugs such as marijuana, cocaine, amphetamines or uppers, depressants, narcotics such as heroin, and hallucinogenics. Sociologists using an interactionist framework believe that drug behavior is a learned behavior. Those who follow the functionalist perspective believe that an increased drug abuse results when social institutions no longer keep deviant behavior in check. From a conflict perspective, people in privileged positions criminalize the drugs that are abused by the poor and powerless. All sociologists acknowledge the biological connections to and implications of biological and physiological addiction, regardless of process of learning, structural or functional imbalances, or economic and power issues that may be a part of the process leading to drug addiction. After reading Chapter 8 and watching this video, you should be able to define drug abuse and identify two central characteristics of drug addiction or drug dependency. Explain how alcohol consumption is related to class, gender, age, and race, and how excessive alcohol consumption can contribute to health and family problems. Describe the detrimental effects of alcohol use and abuse in public places, such as the workplace and the nation's streets and highways. Explain how tobacco use varies by race and ethnicity, age, gender, and education, and how smoking may affect the life expectancy rates even for persons who have never smoked. Discuss the most commonly used prescription and over-the-counter drugs, including caffeine, and explain why there is a reason for concern about the overuse and abuse of these drugs. Identify the major stimulants and depressants abused in the United States, and explain how laws pertaining to marijuana possession and sales have changed in some states. Discuss biological, psychological, and sociological explanations of drug abuse, and identify which approaches you believe are most relevant for explaining drug abuse in the 21st century. And finally, explain how prevention programs, treatment programs, and the therapeutic community approach are used in an effort to reduce problems associated with alcohol and drug use and abuse. So let's first start with drug use and abuse. A drug is any substance other than food or water that, when taken into the body, alters its function in some ways. Drugs are used for either therapeutic or recreational purposes. Therapeutic means to reduce a fever, as an example, and recreational may mean, for example, to achieve a high. Drugs can either be licit or illicit. Licit or legal drugs, such as vitamins, aspirin, alcohol, tobacco, and prescription drugs, are legal to manufacture, possess, and use. Illicit or illegal drugs, such as marijuana and cocaine, are socially defined as deviant. Defining drug abuse is the excessive or inappropriate use of a drug that results in some form of physical, mental, or social impairment. It has both objective and subjective components. The objective component is evidence that harm has been done to individuals, families, communities, or the entire society. The subjective component involves the perceptions about the consequences of drug abuse and what should be done to remedy the problem. Drug addiction or drug dependency refers to a psychological and/or physiological need for a drug to maintain a sense of well-being and avoid withdrawal symptoms. Tolerance occurs when larger doses of a drug are required over time to produce the same physical or physiological effect that was originally achieved by a smaller dose. Tolerance is a matter of degree. Some drugs produce immediate and profound levels of tolerance, while others produce only mild tolerance. Withdrawal refers to a variety of physical and/or psychological symptoms that habitual drug users experience when they discontinue drug use. Let's shift to alcohol abuse and use. The use of alcohol is considered an accepted part of the dominant culture in the United States. Available alcohol and alcoholic beverages are wine, beer, and liquor. Alcohol is a psychoactive drug that is a depressant because it lowers the activity level of the central nervous system, resulting in impaired judgment, affecting mood and behavior, and can lead to death. Social scientists divide long-term drinking patterns into 4 categories. Social drinkers consume alcoholic beverages primarily on social occasions, drinking occasionally or relatively frequently. Heavy drinkers consume greater quantities and are more likely to become intoxicated. Acute alcoholics have trouble controlling their use of alcohol and plan their schedule around drinking. Chronic alcoholics have lost control over their drinking, which impairs their ability to work or maintain social relationships. Chronic heavy drinking or alcoholism can cause permanent damage to the brain or other parts of the body. Mass media tends to glamorize alcohol use and abuse, but some portrayals illustrate realistic problems associated with alcohol abuse. Alcohol consumption and class, gender, age, and race are related to alcohol use and abuse. Income and class differences are associated with alcohol use. Income affects what kind of alcohol is consumed. The relationship between social class and rates of alcohol abuse is still not clear. More affluent people typically have greater resources and more privacy than lower income individuals, and can often protect themselves from deviant labels associated with alcohol use. Gender is associated with drinking behavior. More men than women drink. Women who drink tend to be lighter drinkers than men, who are more likely to drink daily and experience negative personal and social consequences from drinking. Drinking pattern in the teen years are similar for males and females. Age is also a factor in drinking behavior. Alcoholic beverages are among the most widely used psychoactive substances used by young people in the United States. Adolescent drinking is associated with declining academic achievement and increasing emotional distress. The rate of binge drinking is high among young adults between the ages of 18 and 25. Alcohol consumption, including excessive drinking, is often an ingredient of television reality shows glamorizing young drinkers. Reported alcohol consumption varies across racial and ethnic categories. White Americans were more likely than other racial or ethnic groups to report current use of alcohol. Higher rates of risk drinking are reported among Native Americans and Hispanics. White Americans and Native Americans have higher risks for alcohol use disorders. Blacks and Hispanics have higher rates than whites of recurrent or persistent dependence. The negative consequences of drinking typically are greater for Native Americans, Hispanics, and Blacks than for white Americans. We also have personal health problems because although not all heavy drinkers and chronic alcohol abusers exhibit the major health problems that are typically associated with alcoholism, the risk of them is greatly increased. Alcoholics often suffer nutritional deficiencies as a result of poor eating habits. Alcoholism is also associated with fluctuations in blood sugar levels that can cause adult-onset diabetes. Structural loss of brain tissue may produce alcoholic dementia, characterized by difficulties in problem solving, remembering things, and organizing facts about one's identity and surroundings. Chronic alcohol abuse is also linked to cardiovascular problems, such as inflammation and enlargement of the heart, poor blood circulation, reduced heart contractions, fatty accumulations in the heart and arteries, high blood pressure, and other cerebrovascular disorders such as stroke. Over time, chronic alcohol abuse also contributes to irreversible changes in the liver associated with alcoholic cirrhosis. Alcoholics typically have a shorter life expectancy than that of non-drinkers or occasional drinkers. Abuse of alcohol and other drugs by a pregnant woman can damage the fetus. The greatest risk of all is fetal alcohol syndrome, a condition characterized by mental retardation or intellectual disability, and craniofacial malformations, which happens during the first 3 months of pregnancy. Using or abusing alcohol at any time during pregnancy poses extra risks to the fetus. Alcohol ingested by pregnant women easily passes through the placenta to the fetus and can harm the baby's development. We also have family problems. Chronic alcohol abuse or alcoholism makes it difficult for a person to maintain social relationships and have a stable family. Domestic abuse and violence in families are frequently associated with heavy drinking and alcohol abuse. Many members of alcoholic families become enablers, people who adjust their behavior to accommodate an alcoholic. When codependency occurs, family members take on many of the alcoholic's responsibilities and keep the person from experiencing the full impact of their emotions. Codependency is defined as a reciprocal relationship between the alcoholic and one or more non-alcoholics who unwillingly and unwittingly aid and abet the alcoholic's excessive drinking and resulting behaviors. Children who grow up in alcoholic families tend to have higher than normal rates of hyperactivity, antisocial behavior, low academic achievement, and cognitive impairment. Again, alcohol abuse and domestic violence are major problems in many families. In a society that glamorizes alcohol consumption, it's difficult for some people to understand the physical and mental harm that excessive drinking may cause. When we look at alcohol consumption and public problems, this can affect work and driving safety. Chronic alcohol abuse and alcoholism are linked to many social problems. Let's first focus on problems in the workplace. Alcohol abuse and alcoholism have a negative impact on safety and productivity in the workplace, including absenteeism, tardiness, poor quality work, strained relationships with coworkers, and accidents, even fatalities on job sites. It also can impact public safety. Many drivers who have been drinking drive dangerously even when they are not legally drunk, which in most states, including New Jersey, requires a minimum blood alcohol concentration, or BAC, of 0.08 or higher. Drunk driving results in many automobile crashes and/or fatalities, particularly among young drivers. Now we're going to shift from alcohol to tobacco. The nicotine in tobacco is a toxic, dependency-producing psychoactive drug that is more addictive than heroin. So who is most likely to smoke? When examining smoking by race, ethnicity, age, gender, and education, we see some striking differences. The highest rate of smoking is by American Indians and Alaska Natives, followed by whites, blacks, Hispanics, and Asian Americans, not including Native Hawaiians and other Pacific Islanders. Age is related to smoking. Thousands of young people begin smoking every day. The highest rates of smoking for both men and women are in the age 18 to 44 category and the age 45 to 64 category. The lowest rates of smoking is among adults age 65 and over. Men are more likely than women to be current and former smokers. Women are more likely than men to have never smoked. Education is another important variable when looking at current smokers. Cigarette smoking is less prevalent among adults who are college graduates than those who have fewer years of education. Similarly, full-time students are less likely to be smokers than their non-enrolled peers. Smoking, when we look at the effects of it, is hazardous for both men and women, but it is especially problematic for pregnant women since cigarette smoking adversely affects infants and children. Infants who are born to smoking mothers typically have lower than average birth weights and sometimes slower rates of physical and mental growth. They may display signs of stress and withdrawal. Nicotine concentrates in fetal blood, amniotic fluid, and breast milk. Smoking may be associated with spontaneous abortions, sudden obesity in children. Smoking during pregnancy may increase a child's risk of becoming addicted to nicotine later in life. Children who grow up in smoking households are more apt to suffer from frequent ear infections, upper respiratory infections such as bronchitis, sinusitis, allergies, and asthma, and have other health problems than children whose parents do not smoke. Young people have been targeted for smokeless products such as chewing tobacco and moist snuff, which is placed between increases the risk of cancer of the tongue, of leoplastia, a white, thick precancerous patch visible on tissues in the mouth. Smoking is linked to cancer, other serious diseases, and death. tobacco is responsible for about 1 in every 5 deaths in this country. Smoking causes cancer, heart disease, stroke, and lung diseases. Smoking typically shortens life expectancy by 13 to 14 years. People smoke for many reasons, including dependency and being targeted by sophisticated marketing campaigns. We're going to switch to prescription drugs, over-the-counter drugs or OTCs, and caffeine. Let's first look at prescription drugs. Legal drugs fall into 2 categories. Prescription drugs dispensed only by a registered pharmacist upon approval by a physician or dentist, and over-the-counter or OTC drugs, which are available off the shelf and are restricted only by the consumer's ability to pay. The use of prescription drugs is rising. Prescription drug use increases with advanced age. White Americans have the highest percentage of prescription drug use, and Mexican Americans have the lowest. The National Institute on Abuse identifies 3 classes of prescription drugs that are most often abused. The first is pain medication. This is probably the most abused prescription drug. Millions of people benefit from narcotics, but there are risks of short-term abuse and long-term psychological and physical dependence. Other widely used and substance abuse drugs are highly addictive central nervous system depressants used to treat anxiety, panic, and sleep disorders. The third category of highly abused drugs is stimulants and amphetamines. Prozac is a controversial prescription drug that treats depression. More than 4.5 million prescriptions for Prozac are filled annually. Long-term effects of the drug are unknown. The U.S. Food and Drug Administration has ordered that prominent warnings be placed on all antidepressants, indicating that they carry an increased risk of suicidal thinking and behavior in children. Abuse of prescription drugs among teenagers has become an increasing problem. Young people use legal medicines illegally. White American youth have a higher rate than Hispanics or Blacks of illegally taking prescription drugs. Many young people combine prescription drugs with alcohol, which can become deadly. Let's now look at over-the-counter drugs. Widely used OTC drugs include sleep aids and remedies for allergies, coughs, and colds. Abuse of over-the-counter drugs is perhaps the most common among young teens ranging from ages 13 to 16. Cough or cold medicines containing dextromethorphan are the most popular type of OTC drugs to abuse because they are inexpensive and easily accessible. Overdoses have been linked to cases of attempted suicide, especially by white females between 6 and 17. Sleep aids are dangerous when combined with alcohol or some cough and cold remedies, some of which have side effects that can be hazardous if users attempt to drive a car or operate heavy machinery. Now we're going to look at caffeine. Caffeine is a relatively safe drug, but it's also dependency-producing psychoactive stimulant that can be found in coffee, tea, chocolate, soft drinks, and stimulants such as no-dose, and is taken primarily to improve mental alertness and reduce fatigue. The extent of which caffeine actually improves human performance is widely debated. Short-term effects include dilated peripheral blood vessels, constricted blood vessels in the head, and slightly elevated heart rate. Long-term effects of heavy caffeine users more than 3 cups of coffee or 5 cups of tea per day include increased risk of heart attack and osteoporosis, the loss of bone density, and increased brittleness associated with fractures and broken bones. Excessive use of caffeine can lead to caffeineism, a combination of caffeine dependency and a variety of unpleasant side effects such as nervousness, irritability, anxiety, insomnia, headaches, and heart palpitations. Excessive caffeine usage has been linked to caffeine-induced psychiatric disorders such as caffeine intoxication, caffeine-induced anxiety disorders, and caffeine-induced sleep disorders. Now we're going to look at illegal drug use and abuse, and we're going to be looking at marijuana, stimulants, depressants, narcotics, and hallucinogens. What constitutes an illegal drug is a matter of social and legal definitions, and therefore is subject to change over time. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, people in the United States had fairly easy access to drugs that are currently illegal for general use. There were no licensed doctors or pharmacists, and people sold patent medicines that contained such ingredients as opium, morphine, heroin, cocaine, and alcohol. Prescriptions became required for some drugs because of the rapidly growing number of narcotic addicts. Some forms of drug use were criminalized because of their association with specific minority groups. The Harrison Narcotics Act of 1914 required anyone who produced or distributed drugs to register with the federal government, keep a record of all transactions, and pay a tax on habit-forming drugs. It also required that certain drugs be purchased only by physicians. No drug-related legislation has been able to eliminate illegal drug use in the United States. Marijuana is the most extensively used drug in the United States. Marijuana is both a central nervous system depressant and a stimulant that interrupts THC receptors in the brain, producing sedation, a sense of well-being, euphoria, hallucinations, increased blood pressure and heart rate, decreased blood glucose levels causing hunger, impaired motor activity, impaired concentration, decreased short-term memory, paranoia, and decreased motivation. Some studies have found an increased risk of cancer and other lung problems associated with marijuana use. High uses of marijuana smoked during pregnancy can disrupt fetal development. Controversy exists about whether the average potency of marijuana has risen over the last 3 decades, and about whether marijuana should be legalized. At least 24 states in the District of Columbia have legalized marijuana for medical use, often with specific stipulations regarding residency requirements, limits to the amount of possession, payment of fees, and other conditions. For teens and young people, the perceived risk concerning marijuana use has decreased as availability and use of marijuana has risen. Marijuana will continue to raise concern, particularly among younger users, because it's been considered a, quote, gateway drug. Now let's look at amphetamines and methamphetamines. Cocaine and amphetamines are among the major stimulants that are abused in the United States. Cocaine and crack are major dependence-producing stimulant drugs abused in the U.S. It's the third most widely used psychoactive drug after alcohol and marijuana. Users typically sniff the drug into the nostrils, inject the drug intravenously, or smoke it in the form of crack. The effects of cocaine on the human body depend on how pure the dose is and what results the users expect. Most cocaine users experience a powerful rush in which the blood pressure raises and the heart rate raises and respiration increase dramatically. When the drug wears off, the user becomes increasingly agitated and depressed. Some become suicidal. Occasionally, cocaine use results in sudden death by triggering an irregular heart rhythm. People who use cocaine over extended periods of time have higher rates of addiction, disturbed moods and irritability, paranoia, restlessness, hallucinations, infections, heart disturbances, internal bleeding, hypertension, cardiac arrest, stroke, hemorrhaging, and other neurological and cardiovascular disorders than non-users. Intravenous cocaine users who share contaminated needles and syringes are also at risk for HIV and AIDS. Cocaine use is extremely hazardous in pregnancy. Children born to crack-addicted mothers typically suffer painful withdrawal symptoms at birth and deficits in cognitive skills, judgment, and behavior controls. Concerning gender and age, more males than females use cocaine, and the majority of users are in their 20s. Cocaine usage among youth under age 18 has decreased in the last decade. Crack cocaine usage has become widely discussed in the media, particularly because of its association with higher rates of use by racial and ethnic minorities, and because of disparity in sentencing drug crimes. The Fair Sentencing Act of 2010 attempts to reduce the disparity in sentencing between those convicted of crimes involving crack cocaine and powder cocaine. 79% of crack offenders in 2009 alone were Black. Amphetamines are highly potent and highly addictive psychostimulant drugs that increase energy and decrease appetite. Physical effects include hyperactivity, dry mouth, hypertension, dizziness, insomnia, and numerous other medical conditions. Some may be life-threatening. Psychological effects include euphoria, anxiety, agitation, paranoia, and excessive feelings of many kinds, including power and superiority. Withdrawal effects include mental fatigue, depression, and increased appetites. Users quickly develop tolerance for amphetamines. One subclass of amphetamines is referred to as methamphetamine, which also has no legal use. The number of methamphetamine users is increasing. A popular form is crystal methamphetamine, manufactured in illegal labs by amateur chemists, which is smoked. Youth use of amphetamine appears to be decreasing. Chronic methamphetamine use changes how the brain functions, leading to reduced motor skills, impaired verbal functioning, and changes in memory and emotion. Now let's look at depressants. Many people abuse depressants, drugs including alcohol that depresses the central nervous system and may have some pain-killing properties. The most commonly used depressant are barbiturates and anti-anxiety drugs or tranquilizers. The number of non-medical users, including youth users, is at its peak. Relatively low oral doses produce a relaxing and mildly disinhibiting effect. Higher doses result in sedation. Users may develop both physical addiction and psychological dependency on these depressants. Users sometimes use depressants for potentiation, the interaction that takes place when two drugs are mixed together to produce greater effects. Rohypnol and GHB are popular among young people because they are inexpensive and produce a mild euphoria, increased social ability, and lowered inhibitions. Rohypnol, which is an anesthetic and sleep aid in other countries, is not approved for use in the United States. It's known as the date rape drug because a number of women who have been raped after an acquaintance slipped the drug into their drink. GHB was sold in health food stores and used by bodybuilders to increase muscle growth before it was banned by the FDA in 1990. Combining alcohol and Rohypnol or GHB has been linked to auto accidents and deaths from overdoses because it's difficult to judge how much intoxication will occur when depressants are mixed with alcohol. Now we look at narcotics. Narcotics or opiates are available in several forms: natural substances, opiate derivatives, and synthetic drugs. Heroin is the most widely used abused narcotic. Young people are among the heaviest heroin users. The typical heroin abuser is a young male, often a minority group member under age 30 who lives in a low-income area of a large city. Most heroin users inject the drug intravenously, which produces a tingling sensation and feeling of euphoria that is typically followed by a state of drowsiness or lethargy. Users quickly develop a tolerance as heroin and other opiates are highly addictive. Withdrawal symptoms include intense cravings, diarrhea, and dehydration. There are several long-term effects of heroin. In high doses, heroin produces extreme respiratory depression, coma, and even death. Shooting up can cause hepatitis C or HIV from contaminated needles and syringes. Heroin has been linked directly to crimes. Finally, we have hallucinogens or psychedelics. These are drugs that produce illusions and hallucinations and include mescaline or peyote, LSD, PCP, and MDMA, also known as ecstasy. Hallucinogens or psychedelics are used to produce mild to profound psychological effects depending on the dosage. Mescaline or peyote was the earliest hallucinogen in North America. Its consumption dates back to early eras of Native American religious celebrations. LSD, made well known during the 1960s, is one of the most powerful psychoactive drugs. 10 micrograms of the drug can produce highly unpredictable, dramatic psychological effects for up to 12 hours. User report experiences range from beautiful, which would be considered a good trip, to the frightening and extremely depressing or a bad trip, along with flashbacks. Among the most recent hallucinogenics are PCP, also known as angel dust, and MDMA, again known as ecstasy. Initially, PCP was an anesthetic used in surgical procedures, but it was removed from production when patients showed signs of agitation, increased anxiety, and hallucinations after receiving the drug. PCP can be taken orally, intravenously, or by inhalation, but is most often smoked. MDMA or ecstasy is manufactured in illegal labs by inexperienced chemists and is made from amphetamines that produce hallucinogenic effects, relaxation, a sense of insight, and heightened awareness, as well as euphoria. Ecstasy has a high abuse potential and no recognized medical use. Today, cocaine, a powder, and what we see here is in powder form, but can also be in crack form, is the third most widely used psychoactive drug. In the United States, there's this thing known as the War on Drugs. And the War on Drugs was to try to prevent drugs from being shipped into our country or used. The War on Drugs, as of today, has not resulted in significantly reducing the rates of drug abuse. When we think about explanations of drug abuse, we're going to look at it from biological, psychological, and sociological explanations. Some explanations of drug abuse focus on biological factors, while others emphasize environmental influences. One focuses on genetic factors. Studies suggest that children of an alcoholic parent inherits a biological vulnerability to problem drinking or alcoholism. Children of alcoholics might also inherit cognitive or learning impairments or psychological features that increase the risk of alcohol abuse. Other biological studies have found convincing evidence that drugs such as alcohol, heroin, and cocaine act directly on the brain mechanisms responsible for rewards and punishments. As the drug stimulates the areas of the brain that create the sensation of pleasure and suppress the perception of pain, the user receives reinforcement to engage in further drug taking. Psychological explanations of drug abuse focus on either personality disorders or the effects of social learning and reinforcement on drug-taking behavior. Some studies have found that personality disorders are more common among drug users. Hyperactivity, learning disabilities, and behavioral disorders in childhood are associated with greater risk of substance abuse in adolescence or young adulthood. When people have low self-esteem or lack motivation, their desire to get away from problems is intensified, and drugs often provide the most available option for escape. Social psychologists explain drug behavior in terms of social learning theory. Substance use and abuse are socially influenced behaviors that are acquired and sustained through a learning process. Learning takes place through instrumental conditioning, that's getting positive reinforcement or punishment, as well as modeling or imitation of other people's behaviors. We learn attitudes, orientations, and general information about drug use from family members, friends, and significant others, and come to associate positive consequences or positive reinforcement, as well as negative consequences or punishments with drug use. Whether a person abstains from or takes and abuses drugs depends on past, present, and anticipated rewards and punishments associated with abstinence, use, and abuse. There are three major sociological explanations for drug abuse. Symbolic interactionists believe drug behavior is learned behavior that is strongly influenced by families, peers, and other people. People are more likely to abuse drugs if they have frequent, intense, and long-lasting interactions with people who abuse drugs. When there are more factors favoring drug use than are opposing it, the person is likely to use drugs. For example, some children learn to abuse alcohol or other substances by watching their parents drink excessively or use illegal drugs. Other young people learn about drug use from their peer group. People are more prone to accept attitudes and behaviors favorable to drug use if they spend time with members of a drug subculture. Over time, people in heavy drinking or drug subcultures tend to become closer to others within their subculture and more distant from people outside of that subculture. According to the labeling theory, it's particularly difficult for individuals to discontinue alcohol and other drug abuse once they've been labeled alcoholics or drug addicts. The functionalist perspective points out that social institutions such as the family, education, and religion that previously kept deviant behavior in check have become fragmented and somewhat disorganized. Hence, it's now necessary to use formal mechanisms of social control to prohibit people from taking illegal drugs or driving under the influence of alcohol or other substances. External controls in the form of law enforcement are also required to discourage people from growing, manufacturing, or importing illegal substances. Prescription and over-the-counter drugs serve important functions. They benefit patients, doctors, and pharmacists. Dysfunctions occur when patients become dependent and doctors and pharmacists and drug companies are sued over the manufacture or distribution of a drug. Illicit drugs also have a function and dysfunction. Illicit drug use creates and perpetuates jobs at all levels of the criminal justice system, the federal government, and social service agencies. Dysfunctions occur at an individual level due to a severe physical and mental health problem and economic crises that are suffered by addicts and their families. At the societal level, drug abuse contributes to lost productivity, human potential and life, as well as money. The conflict perspective theorists believe that people in positions of power make the sale, use, and possession of some drugs illegal. Those in privileged positions criminalize drugs such as marijuana, cocaine, and heroin because, historically, these substances were abused by the poor and the powerless. Restricting the drug that members of subordinate racial and ethnic groups use is one method of suppressing these groups and limiting their ability to threaten dominant group members or gain upward mobility in society. Powerful corporate interests perpetuate the use and abuse of illegal drugs. So, is there or are there solutions to problems associated with alcohol and drug use? There can be. So, let's first look at prevention programs. There are a variety of prevention programs that are available. Drug and alcohol prevention programs can be divided into three major categories. Primary prevention programs focus on people who have had little to no previous experience with drugs. Secondary prevention programs seek to limit the extent of drug abuse, prevent the spread of drug abuse to other substances beyond the drugs already experienced, and teach strategies for the responsible use of illicit drugs such as alcohol. Tertiary prevention programs seek to limit relapses by individuals recovering from alcoholism or drug addiction. In the United States, a variety of primary and secondary prevention strategies have been employed. Law enforcement agencies have attempted to reduce the supply and availability of drugs, but their efforts have removed only a small fraction of drugs. Efforts to punish offenders have clogged the criminal justice system and overcrowded prisons without noticeably reducing the trafficking and consumption of illegal drugs. Scare tactics and negative education programs have not fared much better. They turn students off and don't achieve their desired goal. Objective information programs often begin in kindergarten and run through grade 12. Using texts, curriculum guides, videos, and other materials, teachers impart information about drugs to students, but some students become more instead of less interested in experimenting. Just Say No and other magic bullet campaigns for preventing drug abuse have had limited success in deterring drug use. Self-esteem enhancement and affective education programs focus on underlying emotional and attitudinal factors involved in drug abuse while building character through teaching positive social values and attitudes. While some prevention programs previously focused on high school students, today elementary schools are among the first lines of attack because drug-taking behavior now starts at younger ages. Nearly 75% of U.S. public schools have a program known as DARE, which is the Drug Abuse Resistance Education Program. This is taught by specially trained police officers who come into schools and teach children how to resist drugs. However, children who have been through DARE programs are no less likely to smoke, drink, or use other substances than children who have not been through the program. Future prevention programs that look hopeful place more emphasis on life skill training. One such program is directed towards 7th grade students with booster sessions in the 8th and 9th grades. It provides information on the short-term consequences of alcohol and other drug use and teaches critical thinking skills and independent decision-making, ways to reduce anxiety and resist peer pressure to take drugs, and how to gain a sense of personal control and self-esteem. Unlike programs that primarily tell students to stay off drugs, life skill training attempts to give them the tools they need to be drug-free. The next generation of drug abuse prevention programs will use cable television and the internet to make people aware of the effects of drug use and addiction and help for drug abuse. However, if illegal drugs continue to flow in the U.S. and television and other media continue to glamorize drug use, the future of prevention programs seems bleak. We also have treatment programs. Alcohol and substance abuse treatment programs involve the use of activities designed to eliminate physical and psychological addiction and to prevent relapse. We also have the medical treatment model. This assumes that drug abuse and alcoholism are medical problems that must be resolved by treatment by medical officials. Treatment can take the form of aversion therapy or behavioral conditioning. For example, drugs are given to heroin and opiate addicts to prevent the euphoric feeling they associate with taking drugs. Supposedly, when the pleasure is gone from taking the drug, the person will no longer abuse the drug. Antabuse is used in treating alcoholism. After the person has been detoxified and no alcohol remains in the bloodstream, antabuse is administered along with small quantities of alcohol for several consecutive days. Because this combination produces negative effects such as nausea and vomiting, the individual eventually develops an aversion to drinking. And finally, we have the therapeutic community. When substance abusers are perceived to have an underlying psychological problem, outpatient or residential treatment generally involves counseling, rehabilitation, and/or the therapeutic community. Perhaps the best known non-residential therapeutic communities are the 12-step meetings, including Alcoholics Anonymous or AA and Narcotics Anonymous or NA. I hope that this was helpful for you. As always, if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please feel free to reach out to me by email. Don't forget, in the description box below is your extra credit question. All you need to do after watching this video and reading Chapter 8 is to answer the question in the comments, take a screenshot, and upload it for up to 1 point added to your final grade. Remember, it's due by Sunday at 11:59 p.m. As always, I hope you have a great day, and until next time, take care.